Well, that was exciting. And hello again. If you're a fan of great spy stories, gritty thrillers, or just like complex and interesting characters, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold is a must-see. It also offers lots and lots to explore. So let's get started with some context. Heading into the 1960s, post-war Britain has often been seen as a downbeat place. But then two things happened that changed everything. Four lads from Liverpool started the British invasion, and in 1962, the world got this. James Bond, secret agents, they became the Marvel universe of the decade. We got American Spies, spy comedies, and Spies on TV. The shows were big and lots of fun. But then, in a couple of years, people wanted something a bit more real.
My name is David Cornwell.
My name is David Cornwell.
My name is David Cornwell.
I, David Cornwell, am a former Eton schoolmaster and former member of the British Foreign Service. I am also the author of 3 novels, and one which became an instantaneous success and to date has sold nearly 250,000 copies. The book is at the top of the American bestseller lists and will be made into a movie later this year. I wrote it under the pen name John le Carre. It is called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold.
Yes, John le Carre, master of espionage, on a network quiz show. If you're wondering, he was the one on the far left. And he must have been a pretty good spy in real life, at least a decent one, because none of the panelists identified him. By the way, this triumph earned him $1,000 and some easy-off oven cleaner. Anyway, after being turned out of the Secret Service, and more on that later, le Carre set out to be the anti-Ian Fleming. His novels were tense, complicated, often downbeat, but packed with details about a fictionalized version of spies and MI6. Le Carre did this so well that many readers and moviegoers believed the stories must have some basis in reality. The writer was amused by this and addressed it in the introduction to the 50th anniversary edition of his novel. He wrote, "The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was the work of a wayward imagination, brought to the end of its tether by political disgust and personal confusion." Of course, these novels work so well because they seem so real. Stories packed with ruthless, cunning, and on-the-edge human beings, all offering a glimpse into a shadowy world that we find interesting. Okay, so let's look at the story in the movie itself. Now, I've just rewatched it, and it really hit me in terms of all the things I liked about it being just much more powerful when I had the opportunity to see it that way. The movie is typical Le Carre. It's densely plotted and full of twists and turns. We follow Alex Lemus, a veteran spy runner played by Richard Burton in an Oscar-nominated performance. Events open on a tense night at Checkpoint Charlie. That's the old main crossing between East and West Berlin. It's dramatically photographed in black and white. Lemus is waiting for an agent to escape the Soviet-controlled East, but as the man cycles to freedom, he is shot. Lemus returns to London, seemingly a broken man. After a private meeting with the head of MI6, he begins going downhill. He leaves the service and he drinks too much. He finally gets work in a second-rate library where he meets Nan. She's an idealistic young communist who strives to protect him. She's played wonderfully by Claire Bloom. But Lemus lashes out regardless and assaults a grocery owner, coincidentally played by James Bond's M. Bernard Lee. After a stint in prison, Lemus is approached by communist agents, and all this ultimately leads him to a complex and perilous mission deep in Eastern Europe. Along the way, Lemus also meets Le Carre's most famous character, George Smiley. Facing danger to himself and someone he actually cares about, Lemus sticks to his mission, but he questions the cost of it all. but this time you're hoping for a positive ending, but you're not sure this is the type of story that will give you one. Now it's time to take a look at the key scene of the film. Now this takes place near the end of the film, and it's got a couple of plot points in it, so spoiler alert. It's very strong. It's a very famous speech, that short speech that Lemus gives about spying and the horrible, dirty world of what espionage is all about. It also shows why Burton was up for an Oscar for Best Actor in this film, which sadly he didn't win.
What the hell do you think spies are? Moral philosophers measuring everything they do against the word of God or Karl Marx? They're not. They're just a bunch of seedy, squalid bastards like me. Little men, drunkards, queers, henpecked husbands, civil servants playing cowboys and Indians to brighten their rotten little lives. Do you think they sit like monks in a cell balancing right against wrong? Yesterday I would have killed Munt because I thought him evil and an enemy, but not today. Today he's evil and my friend. London needs him. They need him so that the great moronic masses you admire so much can sleep soundly in their flea-bitten beds again. They need him for the safety of ordinary, crummy people like you and me.
You killed Fiedler.
How big does a cause have to be before you kill your friends? What about your party? There's a few million bodies on that path.
Now, in talking about this film, I really emphasize what a dark vision of the world and of the world of spies it offers. So it's probably a bit surprising to discover that the director of the film was Martin Ritt, who's known as one of the most sensitive directors to come out of Hollywood. He was an American. But when you consider that 2 years earlier, Ritt directed a very interesting film called HUD, and it was a main showcase, main vehicle for Paul Newman. Now, of course, Newman's always playing wonderful leading characters that you like to spend time with, but in this film, he plays a very nasty, egotistical son of a Texas cattle rancher. And you're watching the film and you keep thinking, well, of course, this is Paul Newman, so he's going to change and things are going to wind up nice. But it never does. It's, again, as in Spy, it's really uncompromising. Later in his career, he continued to make movies that were emotionally rich and really focused on characters. And notably, he directed Sally Field to her Oscar and Norma Ray in 1979, where she played a union organizer. And now, let's turn to our first on-screen look at Le Carre's most famous character, George Smiley. Smiley first showed up in Le Carre's premiere novel, Call for the Dead, and he's back with us in Spy. Of course, Smiley really hit his stride as the main player in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and when Sir Alec Guinness took on the role in the 1970s BBC miniseries, he really made it his own. As you'd expect, Guinness was brilliant, and he spent a lot of time on the role. He came up with character traits like cleaning Smiley's big glasses on the edge of his tie. Le Carre admitted that Sir Alec was so good that in his later books he began writing with Guinness in mind for the character. After this first success, Guinness returned to the role in the equally good miniseries Smiley's People. Then in 2011, Gary Oldman played Smiley in the big screen remake of Tinker Tailor. Of course, Oldman is very good in a grade A production, and it's really worth watching, but it also feels a bit rushed and cuts corners compared to the classic miniseries. Now, the strangest version of Smiley comes in a 1991 minor TV movie, and that's called A Murder of Quality. Now, it features Denholm Elliott in the role, and it's a strange little story because it's by Le Carre, but it's more of a murder mystery, and it's not his usual spy story. And what about George Smiley, first time out, played by Rupert Davies? Well, with George, the mission always comes first. People are second. Of course, Smiley's character has always been like that. This film just rubs it in your face a bit more. And researching this film, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that it was actually Richard Burton who used his international clout to get work for a couple of his friends in some minor roles. Featured as sleazy contact number 1, we have the versatile Michael Hordern. Now, he's always great, and he appeared in things like Sink the Bismarck, but was better known for playing befuddled dads in things like Taming of the Shrew, and The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. As sleazy contact number 2, we have Robert Hardy. You may know him better as Siegfried from BBC's original version of All Creatures Great and Small. I've also got to talk about Cyril Cusack, who's a real favorite of mine. This time he's playing Control, the head of MI6. Now he's the kind of guy who he drinks tea, he speaks quietly, he really seems like a kindly uncle, but he's really utterly ruthless. And Cusack made a living playing characters like this, people who seemed unthreatening but were really quite monstrous. And later he worked with Richard Burton in 1984, which was his last major film. Let's talk about the stars, starting with Richard Burton. And in the 60s, there really wasn't a bigger international superstar than Richard Burton, unless it was his famous partner, Elizabeth Taylor. Of course, they were married and divorced numerous times and were just the sensation of the newspapers and the media at the time. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his role as Lemus here, and he actually wound up losing 2 times in a row. He lost this year to Lee Marvin, and the year before that he lost to Rex Harrison when My Fair Lady swept all the awards. Next we have Claire Bloom, and she's just wonderful in the movie. She's so vulnerable, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, the film really needed that kind of a break. In the book, her character's name's Liz Gold, and she's partly Jewish, but that was altered for release in the mid-60s movie. One interesting tidbit: some years earlier, Bloom had been in a relationship with Burton, and this proved a bit awkward on the set with Liz Taylor in attendance. Bloom later complained she felt shunned and rudely treated by her co-star. The third bill is Austrian-born Oskar Werner, who plays a character named Fiedler. Now, Oskar Werner was a major European leading man. Just a year later, he would appear as Montag in Truffaut's version of Fahrenheit 451. When I came back to this movie, I was really struck by a line of dialogue I'd missed before. And that's when Lemus says, "There's a theory in the service that Etonians are discreet." Now, the line appears in both the book and the movie, and I realized Le Carre had slipped it in as a very dark and bitter joke. Now, during the Cold War, Britain was shaken by a major scandal over something called the Cambridge 5 spy ring. Now, all of the real-life double agents were from the upper classes, including Guy Burgess, who was an Eton man. But the most senior and infamous was Kim Philby. The Philby affair was doubly embarrassing for British intelligence. In 1951, he had already been suspected and removed, only to be reinstated. And the fact that he was a good Cambridge man probably helped there. So Philby continued as a double agent for years, and who knows what kind of damage he did, and later became the dark inspiration for the mole in Tinker Tailor. He wasn't unmasked again until 1963. But when he was, it ended the missions of many vulnerable operatives, men like David Cornwell, who of course turned to writing full-time as John Le Carre. And Philby? Well, he lived out his years as a hero in the Soviet Union. In his honor, they even issued a stamp. And what about companion shows? I'd recommend either version of Tinker Tailor, though I have a strong preference for the BBC miniseries. I also find it kind of amusing that both Tinker and the Smiley's People miniseries featured Patrick Stewart in vital cameo scenes, but in which he never utters a single word. Also, we have to consider the Ipcress file, also from 1965 and based on a novel by Len Deighton. Ipcress was the first of 3 films featuring spy Harry Palmer, and it confirmed Michael Caine as a bankable star after 1964's Zulu. 2 more quick points on Ipcress and the Palmer films. Like Carre's projects, the Caine films featured the bland and the bureaucratic side of spying. There was always lots of worrying about pay grades. But the Palmers also featured outlandish elements, things like futuristic brainwashing machines or invading armies of snowmobiles, things you'd never see in Smiley's world. And ironically, while Ipcress was positioned as another anti-Bond, the entire production was jammed with Bond talent. Ipcress was developed by Bond co-producer Harry Saltzman. John Barry did the haunting score. Production design was by 007 veteran Ken Adam, the man behind the giant volcano set in You Only Live Twice. The film was edited by Peter Hunt, who both directed and edited several of the classic Connery films. So there you have it, a look at the spy who came in from the cold and the cool era of the 60s spy films. I hope you have enjoyed my second foray into the classic world of films, and if you did so, I invite you to subscribe to Walt's Flicks Picks.